Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Thomas's Reading Room. We're reading Trip Across the Pond, Personal Vietnam Experience. We're going into Chapter 8 now, and we'll get right along with it as it's a time-consuming thing. This is attached to the 173rd Airborne, Trip to Nhut, and the Knockout Punch. Word came down that our battalion was going to become attached to the 173rd Airborne for 60 to 90 days. We would be doing operations as a joint force. The 173rd Airborne was camped near a village called Ben Hoa, located on the other side of a highway from Camp Long Ben and approximately 7 miles from Camp Bearcat. The garrison troopers remained at Camp Bearcat, though after a few days some mechanics were sent to Ben Hoa to pull guard. Someone assigned me to communications where I pulled radio watch. Working the night shift was peaceful. The radios were silent most every night, and I was happy about that. Sergeant Terrell and Sergeant Major Graham stayed at Camp Bearcat, and I did not see Sergeant Major Graham during my stay in Ben Hoa. However, I learned that Sergeant Terrell had something cooking. It seemed our company wanted some larger generators, and the Air Force had a couple. A 10 kW was at Nhut Air Force Base, and a 90 kW generator was sitting in Thailand. The pilot for a general at Nhut Air Force Base needed a Jeep. The Air Force, being in the air, could not convince the United States government that they should have Jeeps, thus creating a demand for them. One evening, 3 warrant officers went to a bar in the village of Ben Hoa by way of Jeep. After a few hours, 2 of the warrant officers left the bar and went back to camp. When the 3rd warrant officer, the person that the Jeep had been assigned to, walked outside, he observed that the Jeep was not there. He assumed that the 2 warrant officers took it back with them, leaving him to walk. The next morning, the 3rd warrant officer met with the other 2 and asked why they left him there at the bar without the Jeep. The 2 warrant officers became confused and replied that they did not take the Jeep. They had walked back to camp. The light turned on in each of their heads. Someone had waited until the warrant officers went into the bar, then got into the Jeep and drove it helter-skelter to Saigon, the Nhut Air Force Base. There the Jeep had been delivered, and in a short time it was painted black. Perhaps the person was flown back to Ben Hoa or Camp Bearcat. The Jeep was traded for not only the 2 generators mentioned earlier, there were 27 sheets of 1/2-inch plywood thrown in, plus a passport for Thailand and issued to a certain person. Sergeant Terrell informed me that I would take a soldier to ride shotgun and a 3/4 truck to Nhut Air Force Base. The 3/4 ton truck would be used to pick up those 27 sheets of plywood. A soldier who rode a shotgun and I left for Nhut Air Force Base. As we were about 2 miles outside of Camp Bearcat, we were shot at by who knows who. I drove the 3/4 ton truck as fast as it would go, driving from one side to the other as we sped down the road. We kept our heads down as far as we could and still be able to see where we were going. A couple of miles later, we felt safe enough to go slow and drive straight down the road. We arrived at Nhut Air Force Base and had some of our airmen load those 27 sheets of plywood into the 3/4 ton truck. On the way back to Camp Bearcat, the soldier riding shotgun and I stopped at a bonbon stand to engage in some refreshments and entertainment of sorts. A young woman, who told me later she was part French, had the biggest breast I'd ever seen on a woman her size. She could not have been more than 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she carried no fat to speak of. It was difficult for me to conceive how she could keep herself upright. The soldier riding shotgun sided up with a woman of his liking and vanished. Acknowledging the young woman with the big breast, she took my hand and led me to a small room located at the back of the bonbon stand. The room had a bed of sorts, and the floor was Mother Earth. She treated me really good. When we finished with our personal pleasure, she pulled out a small tin bowl from under the bed with water in it and washed herself. Standing outside by the 3/4 ton truck with the young woman hanging on to me, a papasan tried to sell me a watch for 20 American dollars. The watch was called a Rabu and looked nice, though I was not going to give any money for it. However, there was some plywood that could be traded for the watch. When offering some sheets of plywood for the watch, Papasan reported that he wanted 14 sheets. We bickered back and forth for a few moments. Then I picked up a small stick and drew the number 7 in the dirt. Frankly, I was enjoying the hell out of the game we were playing. Papasan began to yell, making much noise. The young woman and I walked back to the truck, and we were ready to get in when I heard a voice say, "Okay." Walking back to where Papasan stood, I took the watch and counted 7 sheets of plywood. The plywood was taken out of the 3/4-ton truck by a few of his comrades and carried quickly into a tree line, the beginning of a forest. I got into the 3/4-ton truck with the young woman getting in with me. The soldier riding shotgun had his woman sitting with him next to us. After a few moments, the other woman got out. I gave the young woman who was with me a couple of good squeezes, then showed her how to get out. The soldier riding shotgun and I headed for Camp Bearcat. We unlocked the plywood, unloaded the plywood, then I delivered the 3/4-ton truck to the motor pool. Sergeant Ashton was there to greet me. He told me that we had some chainsaws that needed to be fixed. Each company would need them for the operation they were about to go on. Apparently, the terrain they would have to go through was so thick with different kinds of vegetation that the point soldiers would have to use chainsaws to cut a path. I guess the Viet Cong would never know we were in the area. After working on the chainsaws, I started each and began to cut into a large tree trunk to see how well they operated. Mike came out of a metal box mounted on a 2 1/2 that was used as a motor pool office and walked over to me. "Thomas, Sergeant Ashton is going nuts every time you run those saws. You should see him. He grabs his head and goes, 'That's good enough, DuGan, that's good enough. You can stop now, that's good enough, so keep it up, Thomas,' Mike reported. Operating the saws, I sometimes revved them as high as they would go. Well, I had to make sure they were going to withstand the rough treatment the point soldiers would be giving them. After all, they would be depending on those chainsaws. Later that day, Mike told me that Sergeant Ashton went absolutely berserk. After I'd finished, Sergeant Ashton asked Warrant Officer Herb Feldick, did he think DuGan was just doing that, and Herb Feldick replied, "Probably so." Mike and I laughed when talking about it, and so did many other soldiers when they learned what had taken place. Guard duty was given to me and pulled the next day. The day after that, I was kicking back at the mechanic's web talk, sitting on a chair next to my cot and reading a book. It was hotter than hell that day, hotter than usual. A soldier was outside taking the poles out from the flaps and letting the flaps down against the sides of the web talk. Turning around, I looked at the soldier who was letting the flaps down. "What the fuck are you doing?" I said. "I'll show you what the fuck I'm doing," the soldier answered angrily. I turned back around and began to read. My face seemed to burn. I could not move and had no control over my motor impulses for a few moments. Then I gained control. Part of me was on the floor and the rest of me was chest up, was laying on my cot. Confused, I attempted to figure out what was wrong with me. The side of my face still felt warm and perhaps a little sore, though not too sore. I wondered whether I had passed out and fell from the chair to the floor. I walked to our battalion headquarters and mentioned it to some soldiers, and the soldier who was letting the flaps down came up to me. He looked white as a sheet and told me that he was sorry he had hit me. He had been scared to death and thought I may have been dead. The soldier went on to tell me that previously a sergeant had given him a bad time. He had become real pissed, then saying what I had said caused an explosion. He had walked inside and planted his fist against the side of my head at the temple. Obviously, I had not heard anyone walk up to me, and this soldier let me have it. I wanted to hit that soldier with a 2x4. I would need a 2x4, as he was much bigger than me, physically speaking. Of course, there were officers everywhere, so I could not do anything other than accept the soldier's handshake, his apology. Perhaps it was the best thing to do. I went to the headquarters web talk, visited with Robert Kelly, and after reporting the story, relaxed. That night I returned to Benoit and pulled radio watch that night and the next few nights. There was not much radio traffic. If nothing else, it was an excellent opportunity to catch up on my writing and do some serious thinking. The other side of the coin was that I could think too much about home, and that would not be good. Dad and Mom, April 1st, 1967. It's time to sit down and write a line or three. First of all, I received a letter from the Internal Revenue a day or three ago about was owing them $30.83. I thought that you had taken care of it by now, which I'm most assured you have. They are just probably a little slow. Anyway, I wrote them and assured that it was being taken care of and that the sum of $30.83 were opposed, then likely or their check right now. I received a package from you and all of the pictures. I'll send the majority of them home. That sounds like a groovy idea about fixing up the Ford. The shocks are busted in the front end. It would like to have Leo see who he could have fix it. That way probably will try to screw me and you on fixing it. It definitely has to have a front end on it. The pieces that goes between the two fenders and supports the radiator has to be replaced, and the car has to be repainted again. I want it painted sunshine gold. When I come back to the States, I'll be able to pay you in full the apportionate amount of which it will cost to put it into its actual condition. There will be no problem there. If you would do this, I would really be thrilled. So you have my approval on the situation. The beer is all imported from the States. The Vietnamese beer is called 33 and is the only beer that they have. I hope everything is going fine and keeps on going fine. How's my Dodge? Still running, I hope. Did those batteries and antifreeze help any? Well, everything over here is strolling along, wiping out Viet Cong right and left. It's hot, hot. Monsoon season where it just pours rain. I'll close for now and write later. Write soon. Love, Tom. That's it, folks. We will start with the next chapter, Duties at Camp Bearcat. Thank you again, and tell a friend. This is free. Thank you.